The blood on her bare feet left a trail in the dust as Clara Winters ran through the arid landscape of the Wyoming Territory, 1876. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, her vision blurring as the merciless sun beat down upon her exposed shoulders. The once white dress she wore was now torn and stained with dirt, sweat, and blood. Behind her lay everything she had desperately tried to escape: a forced marriage to a cruel man 3 times her age, a life of servitude, and the crushing weight of her dead father's gambling debts. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself as her legs threatened to give way. Just keep moving. The vast prairie stretched endlessly before her, punctuated only by scattered sagebrush and the occasional scrubby tree. She had fled at dawn, stealing away while the household slept, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and a small pouch of coins she had secretly saved over months of working at the general store. Her wedding to Jeremiah Blackwood was to have been that very afternoon. Clara stumbled, her right foot catching on a hidden rock, sending her tumbling down a short embankment. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed awkwardly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she pushed herself up, limping now as she continued her desperate flight. The town of Bitter Creek was far behind her, but Blackwood's men would surely be searching by now. A wealthy rancher and businessman with connections throughout the territory, he was not a man accustomed to being defied. The sun climbed higher and Clara's pace slowed. Her lips were cracked, her throat parched. The shoes she had worn, simple leather walking boots, had fallen apart miles back, the cheap soles separating from the uppers, making them impossible to wear. Now her bare feet left bloody imprints on the hard, packed earth. When she finally collapsed, it was near a small creek bed dry from the summer heat except for a shallow pool of stagnant water. Clara dragged herself to it, desperate enough to drink despite its murky appearance. The water was warm and tasted of earth, but it was wet, and that was all that mattered. As consciousness slipped away, Clara thought she heard hoofbeats in the distance. Fear surged through her, but her body refused to respond. Darkness claimed her as dust clouds rose on the horizon. Vincent Reed pulled back on the reins of his chestnut gelding, slowing the animal as they approached the still form lying near the dried-up creek. His brow furrowed beneath the wide brim of his hat as he dismounted, his boots landing softly on the ground. Years of reading signs in the wilderness had made him observant, and he had been tracking the strange trail of bloody footprints for nearly 2 miles. "Easy, Thunder," he murmured to his horse as he approached the unconscious woman. Her face was streaked with dirt and tear tracks, her honey-blonde hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. Vincent knelt beside her, noting the rise and fall of her chest with relief. She was alive, at least. But her feet were in terrible condition, lacerated and swollen from walking barefoot across the harsh terrain. "Miss," he called, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Can you hear me?" When she didn't respond, Vincent glanced around, taking in their surroundings. The nearest town was Clearwater, about 15 miles to the north. His own cabin was closer, perhaps 7 miles to the east. With the sun beginning its descent and the woman in need of immediate care, the decision was simple. Vincent returned to Thunder, retrieving his canteen and a spare bandana. After soaking the cloth, he gently wiped the woman's face, hoping the cool moisture might revive her. When her eyelids fluttered but remained closed, he knew he'd need to transport her. As he prepared to lift her, Vincent noticed something half buried in the dirt nearby: a woman's boot, its sole separated from the upper. Not far from it lay its mate in similar condition. He collected them, examining the poor craftsmanship with a critical eye before stowing them in his saddlebag. "Looks like you've had a rough journey, miss," he said softly as he carefully lifted her. She was light in his arms, too light, suggesting she hadn't eaten properly in some time. Vincent settled her on Thunder, then mounted behind her, holding her securely against his chest as he turned the horse eastward toward his homestead. The woman mumbled incoherently, her head lolling against his shoulder. "You're safe now," he told her, though he doubted she could hear him. "I'm taking you somewhere you can rest." As they rode, Vincent couldn't help but wonder what had driven this young woman to flee across the wilderness without proper footwear or supplies. Whatever trouble she was in, it must have been dire. He had seen enough of the world's cruelty during his years riding with the cavalry and later as a bounty hunter to recognize desperation when he saw it. By the time his cabin came into view, a sturdy log structure nestled among a stand of pines, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Vincent's property was modest but well-maintained, with a small corral for his horses, a vegetable garden, and a spring-fed well that provided clean water year-round. After years of wandering, he had settled here 3 years ago, seeking the solitude that had eluded him since the war. He carried the unconscious woman inside, laying her gently on his bed. After settling Thunder in the corral with his other horse, a dappled mare named Silver, Vincent returned to tend to his unexpected guest. Clara awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of softness beneath her and warmth surrounding her. For a moment, she kept her eyes closed, fearing that opening them would reveal that this comfort was merely a dream, and she would find herself still lying in the dirt under the punishing sun. When she finally summoned the courage to look, she found herself in a small, tidy cabin. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. She was lying on a bed covered with a patchwork quilt, her feet bandaged and elevated on a folded blanket. Panic flared as she tried to remember how she had gotten here. The last thing she recalled was collapsing by the creek, her strength finally giving out after hours of desperate flight. "You're awake." The deep voice startled her, and Clara turned her head to see a man rising from a chair near the hearth. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in simple clothing, a cotton shirt, denim trousers, and suspenders. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble shadowing his strong jaw. Dark hair fell in waves to his collar, and his eyes, a striking shade of blue-gray, watched her with concern. Clara instinctively tried to sit up, intending to flee, but pain shot through her feet and she fell back with a gasp. "Easy," the man said, approaching slowly with his hands slightly raised, as if to show he meant no harm. "Your feet are in bad shape. You shouldn't try to walk for a few days." "Who are you?" Clara demanded, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Where am I?" "Name's Vincent Reed," he replied, stopping a respectful distance from the bed. "This is my cabin, about 20 miles northeast of Bitter Creek. I found you collapsed near Sagebrush Creek yesterday afternoon." He moved to a small table, pouring water from a pitcher into a cup. "You've been unconscious for nearly a day." He offered her the water, and Clara hesitated only briefly before accepting it, her thirst overcoming her wariness. The water was cool and clean, soothing her parched throat. "Thank you," she said quietly, returning the empty cup. "You're welcome, miss." He raised an eyebrow in question. Clara hesitated. If Blackwood's men were searching for her, giving her real name might be dangerous. Yet something in Vincent Reed's steady gaze made her want to trust him. "Clara," she said finally. "Clara Winters." Vincent nodded, refilling her cup. "Well, Miss Winters, you're welcome to stay here until your feet heal. I found your boots, but they're beyond repair." He gestured to the ruined footwear sitting on a nearby shelf. "I might be able to fashion something temporary, though I'm no cobbler." Clara studied him warily. In her experience, men rarely offered help without expecting something in return. "Why are you helping me?" she asked bluntly. Vincent's expression remained calm. "Because you needed help," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "Are you hungry? I've got stew simmering." Before Clara could respond, her stomach growled loudly, answering for her. A faint smile crossed Vincent's face as he moved to the fireplace where a pot hung over the flames. The aroma of meat and vegetables filled the cabin as he ladled stew into a bowl. "Can you sit up to eat?" he asked, approaching with the food. Clara nodded, carefully pushing herself upright, wincing as the movement sent pain through her injured feet. Vincent placed the bowl in her hands, then retreated to his chair, giving her space. As she ate, Clara surreptitiously studied her rescuer. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. There was a solidity to him, a steadiness that Clara found oddly reassuring. Yet she noticed how he positioned himself always where she could see him, never making sudden movements as if conscious of her unease. "How bad are my feet?" she asked when the bowl was empty. "Bad enough," Vincent replied honestly. "Multiple cuts, some quite deep. I cleaned them as best I could and applied a poultice of herbs that should help with healing. But you won't be walking any distance for at least a week, probably longer." A week. The news sent a wave of anxiety through Clara, a week of being confined while Blackwood's men searched for her. A week closer to the day when her absence would forfeit her father's debt, leaving her mother and younger sister vulnerable to Blackwood's retribution. "I can't stay that long," she said, setting the bowl aside. "I need to keep moving." Vincent studied her, his expression unreadable. "Running from something?" he asked quietly. Clara met his gaze defiantly. "Or toward something. Does it matter?" "It might," he said. "Especially if whoever you're running from comes looking." The color drained from Clara's face, and Vincent nodded as if her reaction confirmed his suspicions. "I won't pry," he said, rising to take her empty bowl. "Your business is your own, but you should know that the nearest town is Clearwater, 15 miles north. The stagecoach comes through every Tuesday and Friday. The next one's due tomorrow." Clara processed this information, trying to form a plan. Do you ever go into town?" she asked hesitantly. "Every couple of weeks for supplies. Was planning to go tomorrow as it happens." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "Could you? Would you be willing to deliver a letter for me?" "I need to get word to my mother and sister." Vincent considered her request. "I could," he said finally, "on one condition." Clara tensed, waiting for the inevitable demand. "That you promise not to try walking on those feet until I return," he finished, surprising her. "Last thing you need is to tear open those wounds and risk infection." Relief washed over her, followed by a pang of shame for expecting the worst of him. "I promise," she agreed. Vincent nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I'll bring you paper and a pencil after I tend to the horses. Try to rest." As he moved toward the door, Clara called after him, "Mr. Reed." He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Something flickered in his eyes, warmth, perhaps, or understanding. He nodded once before stepping outside, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts and the crackling fire. Vincent's routine changed with Clara's presence in his cabin. He slept on a bedroll near the hearth, rose before dawn to tend to his chores, and prepared meals for two instead of one. Clara proved to be a determined patient, insisting on helping however she could from her bed, mending his shirts with neat, even stitches, and offering to prepare vegetables for meals. Her independence impressed him, even as her reluctance to discuss her past intrigued him. The morning he was to leave for Clearwater, Vincent changed Clara's bandages one final time. Her feet were beginning to heal, the smaller cuts already closing, though the deeper lacerations would take more time. "The swelling's gone down," he observed, applying fresh salve to her wounds. "That's a good sign," Clara nodded, watching his hands work with gentle efficiency. "You seem practiced at this," she remarked. "Picked up a few things during the war," Vincent replied, his tone neutral. "And living alone out here, you learn to patch yourself up. You fought in the war." Clara asked, sensing an opening to learn more about this quiet man who had rescued her. Vincent nodded, focusing on rewrapping her right foot. "Union cavalry, joined up in '62, fought till Appomattox." Clara studied his profile, noting the slight tightening around his eyes. "You don't like talking about it," she observed. "Not much to say," he replied, securing the bandage. "Did what I had to, like thousands of others." He moved to her left foot, his touch careful as he examined the worst of the cuts. "This one's healing nicely. Another week and you should be able to put some weight on it." Clara accepted the change of subject, recognizing the boundaries he was setting. "I finished the letter," she said, gesturing to the folded paper on the small table beside the bed, "and I have money to pay for postage." Vincent shook his head. "Keep your money, you might need it later." "I can't ask you to, you didn't ask," he interrupted gently. "I offered." Their eyes met, and Clara felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. There was something in Vincent's steady gaze that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before, not as property to be acquired or a burden to be endured, but as a person worthy of respect. "I'll be back by nightfall." Vincent said, breaking the moment as he gathered the medical supplies. There's food in the pantry, water in the pitcher. Fire's banked, but there's kindling and matches if you need them. Clara nodded, watching as he donned his hat and gun belt. The revolver at his hip reminded her that the world outside was not as safe as this cabin had come to feel. "Be careful," she found herself saying. Vincent paused at the door, a faint smile touching his lips. "Always am," he replied before stepping out into the morning light. After he left, Clara hobbled around the cabin with the aid of a walking stick Vincent had fashioned for her, mindful of his warning not to put weight on her injured feet. She explored her temporary sanctuary more thoroughly, noting the small touches that spoke of Vincent's character books stacked neatly on a shelf, tools arranged with precision, everything in its place. On a small table near the window, she discovered a worn photograph in a simple wooden frame. It showed a much younger Vincent in a Union cavalry uniform, standing beside a seated older man in civilian clothes. Both wore serious expressions, though there was a clear resemblance between them, the same strong jaw, the same steady gaze. "His father," Clara murmured to herself, carefully replacing the photograph exactly as she had found it. As she continued her exploration, Clara realized that despite the cabin's simplicity, it had a feeling of permanence that suggested Vincent intended to stay. Yet there was also a sense of solitude, as if he had deliberately chosen a life apart from others. By the time she heard hoofbeats approaching late that afternoon, Clara had managed to tidy the cabin and prepare a simple meal from the supplies Vincent had left. She had just settled back on the bed when the door opened and Vincent entered, stomping dust from his boots. "Smells good in here," he remarked, removing his hat. "Just some beans and biscuits," Clara replied, pleased nonetheless by his appreciation. "How was town?" Vincent set a package on the table. "Busy, stage was late, but your letter's on its way." He began unpacking his purchases: coffee, flour, sugar, and other staples. "Got some news you might want to hear," Clara tensed. "About what?" "There are men asking questions in Clearwater," Vincent said, his tone carefully neutral as he continued unpacking. "Looking for a young woman with blonde hair who ran off from Bitter Creek, offering a reward for information." Cold fear washed over Clara. Did anyone?" Vincent turned to face her fully. "No one in Clearwater knows you're here, Clara, and I didn't volunteer anything." Relief made her shoulders sag. "Thank you." Vincent nodded, then reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Got something for you," he said, crossing to hand it to her. Clara accepted it with surprise. "What is this? Open it and see." Unwrapping the paper revealed a pair of women's boots, not new, but well made and in good condition, with sturdy soles and soft leather uppers. "I noticed yours were about the same size as Mrs. Holloway's," Vincent explained. "She runs the boarding house in town. Her feet have been giving her trouble, so she was happy to sell these, said they pinch her bunions." Clara ran her fingers over the boots, emotion tightening her throat. It was such a simple thing, a pair of used boots, yet the thoughtfulness of the gesture struck her deeply. "I can't accept these," she protested weakly. "You've already done so much. You can't very well leave without shoes," Vincent pointed out pragmatically. "Consider it an investment in your future travels." Clara looked up at him, trying to read his expression. "You still plan to let me leave, even knowing there are men looking for me?" Vincent met her gaze steadily. "It's not my place to keep you anywhere you don't want to be," he said simply. "Though I admit I'm curious about what would drive a woman to run until her feet bled." The quiet understanding in his voice broke something loose inside Clara. After days of holding her story tightly within, the words came pouring out. "My father died 6 months ago," she began, her hands still clutching the boots. "He left nothing but debts, gambling debts mostly. Jeremiah Blackwood held the largest note. He's the wealthiest man in Bitter Creek, owns half the businesses and most of the good grazing land. He's also 53 years old, with 2 wives already in the ground." Vincent's expression darkened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "He offered my mother a deal: he'd forgive the debt if I married him. If not, he'd take our house and the small plot of land we have. My mother and 12-year-old sister would have nowhere to go." Clara swallowed hard. I agreed for their sake. The wedding was set for last Sunday. But you ran, Vincent observed quietly. Clara nodded. 3 days before the wedding, I overheard Blackwood talking to his foreman. He plans to send my mother and sister away once we're married, said he wouldn't be burdened with another man's leavings. After everything I was sacrificing, he still meant to break his word. Her voice hardened. That night, I slipped a sleeping powder into the evening tea and took what money I could find. By dawn, I was miles away. Vincent absorbed her story, his jaw tightening. So the men searching for you are Blackwood's employees, Clara confirmed. He won't let me go easily. Not because he cares for me, but because no one defies Jeremiah Blackwood. And your letter, Vincent asked, won't that lead him to wherever your family goes? Clara shook her head. I was careful. I told my mother to take Lily and go to my aunt in Denver. Blackwood doesn't know about her. I signed it with a childhood nickname only my family would recognize. Vincent nodded slowly, impressed by her foresight. What will you do now? It was the question Clara had been asking herself for days. Keep moving, she said finally. Find work somewhere far from here, maybe California. Once I've saved enough, I'll send for my mother and sister. That's a long journey for a woman alone, Vincent observed, his tone neutral. I don't have much choice, Clara replied, meeting his gaze directly, unless you're offering an alternative. The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Vincent held her gaze for a long moment before looking away. You should rest, he said finally, moving toward the door. I need to see to the horses. As he stepped outside, Clara stared down at the boots in her lap, wondering if she had imagined the brief flash of something longing, uncertainty. In Vincent's eyes, before he'd turned away, 2 more days passed in a curious domestic rhythm. Vincent tended to his chores while Clara continued to recover, her feet healing well enough that she could now stand for short periods without pain. They shared meals and conversations that grew increasingly comfortable, though Vincent remained reticent about his past. On the 3rd evening after his trip to town, as they sat by the fire after supper, Clara finally broached the subject that had been on her mind. Why do you live out here alone, Vincent? She asked quietly. He looked up from the piece of harness he was repairing, his expression guarded. Prefer the quiet, he said simply. Clara persisted gently. There's quiet to be found closer to town. You've chosen isolation. Vincent's hands stilled. Maybe I have, he acknowledged after a moment. Some men aren't meant for company. I don't believe that, Clara said. Not about you anyway. You've been nothing but kind and considerate since the moment you found me. Kindness to a stranger in need isn't the same as. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. As what? Clara prompted. Vincent set aside his work, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. After the war, I rode with the U.S. Marshals for a time, he said, the abrupt change of subject surprising her. Then took up bounty hunting. Spent years tracking men who didn't want to be found. His voice grew distant. You see a lot of the darkness in people doing work like that. Changes how you see the world, changes you. Clara waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. 4 years ago, I was tracking a man wanted for killing his wife, Vincent continued, his voice low. Followed him to a small town in Montana. When I found him, he had a woman with him, young, pretty, said she was his sister. A muscle in his jaw tightened. I believed him, let my guard down. She shot me in the back while I was putting handcuffs on him. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. My God. I survived, obviously, Vincent said with grim humor. But the bullet damaged something. Doctors said I was lucky to walk again. He rolled his shoulder unconsciously. Decided then that I was done with people. Bought this place, set up a life where I didn't have to trust anyone but myself. And then I showed up, Clara said softly. Vincent's eyes met hers, something vulnerable flickering in their depths. And then you showed up, he agreed, bleeding and unconscious, about as threatening as a newborn fawn. A small smile touched Clara's lips. I'm stronger than I look. I've noticed, Vincent replied, his own mouth curving slightly. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Clara found herself studying the lines of his face, the way the firelight caught in his dark hair, the strength in his hands. He was not classically handsome, perhaps, but there was something compelling about him, a solid presence, a quiet integrity that drew her. "Vincent," she began, not entirely sure what she meant to say. The sudden sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Vincent was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the revolver at his hip. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice transformed, harder, colder. "Away from the windows." Clara nodded, fear clenching her stomach as Vincent moved to douse the lanterns, leaving only the fire's glow. He positioned himself beside the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. "3 riders," he reported quietly, "coming up the trail." "Blackwood's men," Clara whispered, her heart pounding. "Can't tell yet." Vincent checked his revolver, then reached for the rifle mounted above the door. "But they're riding hard, and it's well past visiting hours." Clara pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the pain that shot through her still healing soles. "I should hide." Vincent shook his head. "No time and nowhere they wouldn't search." He handed her a small derringer from a drawer. "Take this. Last resort only." The weight of the small gun was foreign in Clara's hand, but she gripped it tightly, nodding her understanding. "Whatever happens," Vincent said, his eyes meeting hers intently, "you're under my protection now. Remember that." Before Clara could respond, hoofbeats thundered into the yard, followed by the sound of men dismounting. Vincent positioned himself by the door, rifle ready but not raised. "Reed." A voice called, "Vincent Reed, we know you're in there." Vincent's expression remained impassive as he called back, "State your business." "Name's Dawson, riding for the Diamond B Ranch. We're looking for a woman blonde in her 20s. Ran off from Bitter Creek about a week ago. Thought you might have seen her, being as you were in Clearwater asking about women's boots." Clara's breath caught. Someone in town had talked after all. Vincent's eyes flicked to her, then back to the door. "What's your interest in this woman?" he asked loudly. "Mr. Blackwood's offering $50 for information leading to her return," Dawson replied. "100 if she's brought back unharmed. She's his fiancée, disappeared right before their wedding. Family's worried sick." A harsh laugh escaped Clara before she could stop it. Vincent silenced her with a look. "Haven't seen any women out this way," he called through the door. "But if I do, I'll be sure to let the law know." There was a pause, then the sound of muttered conversation outside. "Mind if we come in and warm ourselves by your fire?" Dawson called. "Been a long ride." "Mind very much," Vincent replied evenly. "It's late and I was turning in. You boys can make camp by the creek if you need to rest." The silence that followed was tense, filled with unspoken threat. "Mr. Blackwood would take it as a personal favor if you'd cooperate," Dawson said, his tone hardening. "He's an influential man in these parts." "Influential in Bitter Creek, maybe," Vincent replied. "This is Clearwater County, and I don't owe Blackwood any favors." The sound of a gun being cocked carried clearly through the night air. "Now, see, that's where you're wrong, Reed," Dawson said, all pretense of civility gone. "When Mr. Blackwood wants something found, it gets found, and when he sends men to do a job, they do it thorough. So either you open this door or we open it for you." Vincent's expression remained calm, but Clara saw a dangerous light enter his eyes. "You boys might want to reconsider," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "I've got a Winchester trained on that door, and I rarely miss my first shot." "Or my second." "There's 3 of us and 1 of you," Dawson countered. "Poor odds for you," Vincent replied. "Because after the first of you falls, the other 2 will be shooting blind into a dark cabin. Meanwhile, I'll know exactly where you are." Another silence, longer this time. "You threatening officers of the law, Reed." Dawson tried a different tack. "You're not wearing any badges I can see," Vincent replied. "Just hired guns doing a rich man's dirty work. Now, I've asked you politely to move on. Next time won't be so polite." The tension stretched unbearably until finally, Clara heard muttered curses and the sound of retreating footsteps. Moments later, horses' hooves thundered away into the night. Vincent remained by the window, watching until the riders disappeared from sight. Only then did he lower the rifle, turning to Clara with a grim expression. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "Maybe not tonight, but soon, and next time they'll bring more men." Clara's legs suddenly felt weak, and she sank onto the edge of the bed. "I've brought danger to your door," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Vincent shook his head, setting the rifle aside. You didn't bring it. Blackwood did. He moved to check the door's sturdy locks. But you're right that it's not safe for you here anymore. They'll watch the trails, the road to town. What can I do? Clara asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Where can I go? Vincent was silent for a long moment, his back to her as he stared out the window into the darkness. When he finally turned, his expression was resolute. There's a place, he said slowly. A valley in the mountains about 40 miles west of here. Good water, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms. I found it years ago, built a small cabin there as a hunting lodge. He paused. Few people know about it. Could be a safe haven, at least until we figure out something more permanent. Clara caught the significance of his words. Vincent met her gaze steadily. I won't send you out there alone, Clara, not with Blackwood's men searching. If you'll have my company, I'll help you get somewhere safe. The relief that washed over Clara was so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Why would you do this? She asked. You barely know me. Vincent's expression softened slightly. I know enough, he said simply. Rest now, we'll leave before dawn. The night passed slowly, with Vincent taking watch while Clara tried unsuccessfully to sleep. By the time the first pale light of dawn appeared on the horizon, they were both exhausted but ready to depart. Vincent had packed supplies efficiently: food, ammunition, medical supplies, and other necessities, distributing the weight between his two horses. The mare's gentle, he told Clara as he helped her mount the dappled gray. Silver knows the trail and will follow Thunder's lead. Clara nodded, adjusting her position in the saddle. The boots Vincent had given her fit well, though her tender feet protested even the slight pressure required to rest in the stirrups. They set out as the sun crested the eastern hills, taking a narrow game trail that led away from the main road. Vincent rode slightly ahead, constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of pursuit or danger. Clara followed silently, impressed by his woodcraft as he frequently dismounted to obscure their tracks or chose paths that would hide their passage. By midday, they had entered more rugged country, the trail winding through stands of pine and aspen as it gradually climbed into the foothills. Vincent called a brief halt by a small stream to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and hardtack. How much farther? Clara asked, massaging her aching legs. It had been years since she'd ridden for any distance. We'll reach the valley by nightfall if we maintain this pace, Vincent replied, refilling their canteens. But we need to be careful. These hills can be treacherous if you don't know them. As if to emphasize his point, the distant cry of a mountain lion echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down Clara's spine. Are there many predators in these parts? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent nodded, his expression serious. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. But they generally avoid humans unless threatened or desperate. He checked the position of the sun. We should keep moving. I want to reach the high pass before sunset. They continued their journey, the trail growing steeper and more challenging as the afternoon wore on. Clara found herself increasingly grateful for Silver's sure-footed nature, as the mare picked her way carefully across rocky terrain and narrow ledges. Despite her discomfort, Clara couldn't help but appreciate the wild beauty surrounding them: soaring cliffs, ancient pines, and glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance. As the shadows lengthened, Vincent led them through a narrow passage between towering rock formations. The trail beyond opened suddenly, revealing a hidden valley nestled among protective mountains. A small lake gleamed in the center, fed by a cascade tumbling down the western slope. Meadows of wildflowers stretched toward a dark line of trees, and nestled among those trees, Clara could just make out the outline of a cabin. It's beautiful, she breathed, reining Silver to a halt beside Vincent. It is, he agreed, something like pride in his voice. Found it by accident while tracking a wounded elk, spent that winter building the cabin. His eyes scanned the valley with affection. Always thought I'd retire here someday. Why didn't you? Clara asked. Vincent shrugged. The other place is more practical. Closer to town, better for raising horses. He clicked his tongue, urging Thunder forward. Come on, let's get settled before dark. The cabin was smaller than Vincent's main home but solidly built, with a stone fireplace and sturdy shutters on its windows. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, offering views of both the lake and the meadow. Inside was simple but comfortable: a bed, a table with chairs, a cooking area, and shelves stocked with preserved food and basic supplies. "You keep it well provisioned," Clara observed as Vincent lit the lamps. "Come up every few months to check on things, replace supplies," he explained, moving to start a fire in the hearth. "Never know when you might need a refuge." While Vincent tended to the horses in a small lean-to stable behind the cabin, Clara took stock of their new sanctuary. Despite its isolation, the cabin felt welcoming, less Spartan than Vincent's main house. Small touches surprised her: a vase that could hold wildflowers, a rocking chair by the fire, a shelf of books ranging from practical manuals to poetry collections. When Vincent returned, Clara was examining a carving of a soaring eagle that sat on the mantelpiece. "Did you make this?" she asked, admiring the detail in the wooden bird's wings. Vincent nodded, seeming almost embarrassed. "Passes the time during winter evenings." "It's beautiful work," Clara said sincerely. "You have an artist's hands." Something flickered in Vincent's eyes at her words, a vulnerability quickly masked. He busied himself unpacking their supplies, changing the subject to practical matters of their situation. "We should be safe here," he told her as they shared a simple supper of beans and salt pork. "Valley's hard to find if you don't know it's here. Only one main trail in, and I've set up warnings along it, bells on wires that will sound if anyone passes." Clara nodded, grateful for his thoroughness. "How long do you think we'll need to stay?" Vincent considered the question. "Depends on Blackwood's determination. Men like him aren't used to losing what they consider theirs." He met her gaze directly. "Do you have family or friends who might help you, somewhere far from Wyoming territory?" "My aunt in Denver," Clara replied, "but I haven't seen her in years. I'm not even certain she'd remember me." "It's somewhere to start," Vincent said pragmatically. "Denver's a growing city, easy to disappear there." A sudden wave of exhaustion washed over Clara as the day's long ride and emotional strain caught up with her. Vincent noticed immediately, rising to prepare the bed. "You should rest," he said. "I'll take the chair tonight." Clara wanted to protest, but her body's demands overruled her manners. She barely remembered Vincent helping her to the bed before sleep claimed her. Days in the valley settled into an unexpected rhythm. Vincent spent mornings hunting or fishing while Clara tended to the cabin. Her feet continued to heal, allowing her increasing mobility. In the afternoons, they often worked together preserving meat, gathering edible plants, or making repairs to the cabin. Evenings were spent by the fire, talking or reading from Vincent's small library. To Clara's surprise, she found herself more at ease in this wilderness than she had ever been in Bitter Creek. There was a freedom here, away from society's expectations and Blackwood's threats. Even more surprising was how comfortable she felt in Vincent's company. Despite his reserved nature, he proved to be knowledgeable on many subjects, from natural history to literature, revealing an educated mind behind his frontier exterior. A week into their stay, Vincent began teaching Clara to shoot, starting with the small derringer and progressing to his revolver. "Stand firm," he instructed, positioning himself behind her as she aimed at a row of cans set up on a fallen log. "Both eyes open. Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger, don't pull." Clara was acutely aware of his presence, the solid warmth of him at her back, his hands steadying hers, the low rumble of his voice close to her ear. When she finally fired, hitting one of the cans and sending it flying, her triumph was mingled with a flutter of something else, something that had been growing each day in Vincent's company. "Good shot," he praised, stepping back. "Try again." By the end of the session, Clara had hit more targets than she'd missed, earning a rare smile from Vincent. "You're a natural," he told her as they walked back to the cabin together. "Few more days of practice, you'll be able to defend yourself if needed." "I hope it won't be needed," Clara replied, though the weight of the revolver had begun to feel familiar in her hand, a tool rather than a terrifying object. Vincent's expression sobered. "So do I, but the world's not always kind to women alone." I'm not alone right now, Clara said softly, meeting his gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the bond forming, tentative but unmistakable. Vincent looked away first, his jaw tightening as if in silent argument with himself. We should get back, he said finally. Storm's coming. That night, as rain lashed the cabin and thunder rolled across the valley, Clara lay awake, listening to Vincent's even breathing from his bedroll near the hearth. In the 2 weeks since he had found her bleeding and unconscious, he had saved her life, protected her from Blackwood's men, and brought her to this sanctuary. Yet he maintained a careful distance, as if afraid to cross some invisible boundary. Clara understood his reticence. The betrayal he had experienced had clearly left deep scars, making trust difficult. And she herself was still running, her future uncertain. Yet in this isolated valley, something was growing between them, something neither had anticipated when they began this journey. The next morning dawned clear and fresh, the storm having washed the world clean. Vincent rose early as always, returning from checking his trap lines to find Clara outside, gathering wildflowers that grew along the cabin's edge. For the table, she explained when he approached, a question in his eyes. Vincent nodded, his gaze lingering on her longer than usual. The morning light caught in her hair, turning it to gold, and for a moment he seemed unable to look away. I was thinking, he said finally, we might ride to the North Ridge today, views impressive after a rain. Clara smiled, pleased by the invitation. I'd like that. They set out mid-morning, riding side by side where the trail allowed. Vincent seemed more talkative than usual, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his previous visits to the valley. Clara listened, asking questions that drew him out further, enjoying this glimpse of a more open Vincent. The North Ridge proved to be everything he had promised, a sweeping vista of mountains and forests stretching to the horizon, with their valley nestled like a hidden jewel below. It's breathtaking, Clara said as they dismounted at the viewpoint. Worth the climb, Vincent agreed, securing the horses before joining her at the edge. They stood in companionable silence, absorbing the panorama before them. Clara was acutely aware of Vincent beside her, his steady presence, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers, the scent of leather and pine that she had come to associate with him. I've been thinking about Denver, she said finally, about what I might do there. Vincent glanced at her, his expression unreadable. And I could find work as a seamstress, perhaps, or in a shop. Clara's fingers worried the edge of her shawl. Save enough to send for my mother and sister. Vincent nodded slowly. You have skills, you'd manage. Yes, Clara agreed, though her voice lacked conviction. The prospect of starting over alone in a strange city seemed daunting after these peaceful days in the valley. I just wish. She trailed off, unsure how to express the conflicting emotions within her. What do you wish, Clara? Vincent asked quietly. She turned to face him fully, gathering her courage. I wish things were different, that I wasn't running from Blackwood, that you. She hesitated, then continued more softly, that you didn't feel the need to be alone. Vincent's gaze intensified, something vulnerable showing through his usual reserve. Clara, he began, his voice rougher than usual, I'm not a man who finds words easy, especially about feelings, I know, she said gently. These past weeks, he continued, clearly struggling, having you here, it's made me question things I thought I knew about myself, about what I want. Clara's heart quickened. And what do you want, Vincent? The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Vincent stepped closer, his hand rising hesitantly to touch her cheek. Things I probably shouldn't, he admitted, his voice low. Things I haven't let myself want for a long time. Clara leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. Perhaps it's time to want again, she whispered. For a breathless moment, Vincent remained still, seeming to wage some internal battle. Then, with a soft sound of surrender, he lowered his head and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he expected her to pull away. When Clara instead stepped closer, her hands rising to rest against his chest, Vincent's arms encircled her waist, drawing her fully against him as the kiss deepened. It was Clara who finally broke away, breathless and flushed. I've been wanting you to do that for days, she confessed, a shy smile curving her lips. Vincent's answering smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and worry. I've been wanting to do it since the moment you first stood up to me in my cabin, he admitted. Even weak and injured, you had such spirit, Clara laughed softly, joy bubbling up inside her. We're quite a pair, aren't we, the runaway bride and the hermit bounty hunter. Former bounty hunter, Vincent corrected, his arms still around her waist. I much prefer my current occupation. And what's that? Clara asked teasingly. Vincent's expression grew serious. Protecting what matters, he said simply. The sincerity in his voice touched Clara deeply. She reached up to trace the line of his jaw, marveling at this unexpected turn her life had taken. A month ago, she had been facing a loveless marriage to a cruel man. Now she stood on a mountaintop in the arms of a man who looked at her as if she were something precious. What happens now? She asked softly. Vincent sighed, reality intruding on the moment. Blackwood's still a threat, he acknowledged, and your family needs you. Yes, Clara agreed, though she made no move to leave his embrace. But perhaps there's a way forward that includes both my family and this. She gestured between them, unable to fully name what was developing. Hope flickered in Vincent's eyes. I'd like to find that way, he said. If you're willing, I am, Clara replied without hesitation. More than willing. Their second kiss held promise of futures neither had dared imagine just days before. The ride back to the cabin was filled with stolen glances and brushed hands, both of them adjusting to this new understanding between them. As they approached the valley floor, however, Vincent suddenly rained thunder to a halt, his posture alert. What is it? Clara asked, instantly concerned. Vincent pointed to a barely visible thread strung across the trail, one of his warning systems. It's been triggered, he said quietly, drawing his revolver. Someone's entered the valley. Fear clutched at Clara's heart. Blackwood's men, maybe. Vincent's expression was grim. Stay close, but be ready to ride for the eastern pass if I tell you to. They proceeded cautiously, Vincent leading them on a circuitous route that approached the cabin from behind, using the trees for cover. As they drew nearer, Clara could make out two horses tethered outside, neither of which belonged to Blackwood's ranch. Vincent frowned, studying the unfamiliar mounts. Not Blackwood's usual men, he murmured. But that doesn't mean they're not working for him. They dismounted at a distance, securing their horses before approaching on foot. Vincent moved silently through the underbrush, Clara following his lead as best she could. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Vincent motioned for her to stay back while he crept forward for a better view. Clara watched anxiously as he disappeared among the trees. Minutes stretched endlessly until he finally returned, his expression bewildered. It's a woman and a young girl, he reported in a low voice. Sitting on our porch, a woman and... Clara's eyes widened as realization struck. Vincent, it could be my mother and sister, but how would they find us? Vincent shook his head, equally puzzled. Only one way to find out. They approached the cabin openly, Vincent's hand still near his holster as a precaution. As they emerged from the trees, the woman on the porch stood, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Clara, she called uncertainly. Clara, is that you? Mother. Clara broke into a run, disbelief and joy propelling her forward. Lily. The reunion was a blur of tears and embraces. Clara's mother, Margaret Winters, held her daughter tightly, while 12-year-old Lily danced around them, chattering excitedly. Vincent stood back, watching the scene with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Finally, Clara remembered her manners and turned to include him. Mother, Lily, this is Vincent Reed. He saved my life and has been protecting me from Blackwood's men. She moved to his side, her hand finding his. Vincent, this is my mother, Margaret, and my sister, Lily. Margaret Winters studied Vincent with shrewd eyes that missed nothing, including the way her daughter stood close to him. Mr. Reed, she said, extending her hand. It seems we owe you a great debt. Vincent shook her hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable with the formality. No debt, madam. Just did what anyone would do. Margaret's raised eyebrow suggested she highly doubted that, but she merely nodded. Nevertheless, you have our gratitude. But how did you find us? Clara asked, the question that had been burning since their appearance. And why aren't you in Denver with Aunt Catherine? Margaret gestured for them all to sit on the porch. Your letter reached us, she explained. But the day after it arrived, Blackwood's men came to the house, demanding to know where you'd gone. They searched everything, found the envelope with the Denver postmark. Her face hardened with remembered anger. Blackwood himself came later, said he'd have men watching the Denver stage and train stations, said he'd find you no matter what. Clara paled. So you couldn't go to Aunt Catherine? No, Margaret confirmed. Instead, we slipped away at night, took the stage in the opposite direction to Clearwater. Clearwater, Vincent interjected, frowning. That was risky. Blackwood's men have been asking questions there. Margaret nodded grimly. We discovered that quickly enough. But while we were at the general store, trying to decide what to do next, we overheard the shopkeeper's wife talking about that solitary Reed man who had recently bought women's boots and supplies for two. A smile touched her lips. It wasn't hard to put together the pieces. But how did you find the valley? Clara asked. Vincent says it's difficult to locate if you don't know it's here. At this, Lily piped up eagerly. We followed a trapper. He was delivering furs to the general store and mentioned he was heading up to check his lines near Reed's hunting cabin. So we paid him to let us follow. Vincent raised an eyebrow at this information. Jeb Wilson, he said with a sigh. Should have known he'd know about this place. Man can track a ghost through a snowstorm. He was very kind, Margaret assured him, left us here and continued on his way. Said he'd keep quiet about seeing us. Clara squeezed Vincent's hand, sensing his discomfort at this breach of his sanctuary secrecy. It's all right, she said softly. If not for Jeb, they might never have found us. Vincent nodded, though his expression remained troubled. Blackwood's reach is longer than I anticipated, he said. If he's watching Denver, he might have men in other cities too. The implication hung heavily in the air. Where could they go that would be truly safe? As if reading her daughter's thoughts, Margaret spoke up. I have news about Blackwood that might change things, she said. The night before we left, there was talk in town that the bank in Cheyenne is calling in some of his loans. Apparently, his last cattle drive didn't bring in the profits he expected, and there are rumors that several of his mining investments have failed. Vincent's interest sharpened. Financial troubles, he mused. That would explain his desperation to secure your father's land. It's small but strategically located. And it would explain his insistence on the marriage, Clara added. If he's in debt, my dowry the land would help stabilize his position. He's still dangerous, Vincent cautioned. Men like Blackwood don't surrender power easily. No, Margaret agreed. But he's vulnerable now in a way he wasn't before, and with the right pressure. Vincent studied Margaret with new respect. You have something in mind, Mrs. Winters. A slow smile spread across Margaret's face, a smile Clara recognized from childhood, one that appeared whenever her mother was about to outmaneuver someone. I believe I do, Mr. Reed, but I'll need your help. Inside the cabin, as Lily explored with childlike curiosity, the adults gathered around the table to hear Margaret's plan. Before we left, I visited Mr. Holloway at the bank, she explained. As your father's executor, he had access to all the legal documents regarding Jeremiah's loan. And Clara prompted, and there's a clause your father insisted upon, one Blackwood likely assumed would never be invoked. If the full debt is repaid within 1 year of your father's death, all claims against the property are void. Vincent leaned forward, intrigued. When exactly does that year end? 3 weeks from now, Margaret replied. We've been saving everything we could, and your Aunt Catherine sent money when I wrote to her about the situation, but we're still short. How much? Clara asked. $200, Margaret said. A substantial sum, but not impossible. Clara's heart sank. It might as well have been $2,000 for all their ability to raise it in 3 weeks while hiding from Blackwood. Vincent was silent, his expression thoughtful. I might have a solution, he said finally. There's a horse auction in Sheridan next week. I've been training a pair of Mustangs I captured last year, fine animals that should fetch a good price. You'd sell your horses for us? Clara asked, touched by the offer. Vincent's eyes met her steadily. For you, he corrected softly, and for your family's future. The tenderness in his gaze made Clara's heart swell. Margaret observed the exchange with interest but tactfully changed the subject to logistics. Sheridan's risky, she noted. Blackwood has business connections there, Vincent nodded. Which is why Clara and Lily should stay here with you while I handle the auction. I'm less likely to be recognized or questioned. Clara started to protest, but Vincent continued. Once the horses are sold, I'll return. Then we can make our way to Bitter Creek and settle this matter once and for all. It's a good plan, Margaret said approvingly. But what then? Even with the debt paid, Blackwood won't simply accept defeat. He's a vindictive man. A determined look settled on Vincent's features. By then, I hope to have gathered enough evidence of Blackwood's other activities to ensure he leaves you alone. I have contacts from my martial days who might help. The discussion continued into the evening, refining details and contingencies. As they talked, Clara found herself marveling at how naturally Vincent integrated her family into his planning, how readily he offered his resources and skills to their cause. This was not the solitary, distrustful man who had reluctantly taken in a barefoot runaway. This was a man finding his way back to connection, to caring. Later, as Margaret and Lily settled into the cabin's bed while Clara and Vincent prepared to sleep on bedrolls on the porch, her mother drew her aside. "He's a good man," Margaret said quietly, nodding toward Vincent. "Different from what I might have expected for you, but solid, honorable." "Yes," Clara agreed, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. "He is." Margaret studied her daughter's face. "You care for him?" It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "I do. More than I thought possible after knowing someone such a short time." "Sometimes the heart knows quickly what the mind takes time to accept," Margaret said with unexpected gentleness. "Your father and I were engaged after knowing each other just 2 weeks." Clara smiled at this piece of family history she'd never heard before. "And were you happy?" "Very," Margaret replied, a shadow of old grief passing across her face. "Despite his faults and our struggles, we loved each other deeply." She squeezed Clara's hand. "I want that for you." "Love, not convenience or obligation." "I think I might have found it," Clara admitted softly, "though we haven't spoken of the future yet." "There's time," Margaret assured her. "First, we secure your freedom from Blackwood, then you can both decide what comes next." The next morning, Vincent began preparations for his journey to Sheridan. The 2 Mustangs, a bay stallion and a chestnut mare, were brought from a hidden meadow where they had been grazing and checked over carefully. "They're beautiful," Clara remarked, watching as Vincent examined the stallion's hooves. "You've trained them well." "Had them since they were yearlings," Vincent replied, a note of pride in his voice. "They should bring at least 200, maybe more if the right buyers are there." Clara stroked the mare's velvety muzzle, a pang of guilt troubling her. "I hate that you have to sell them because of me." Vincent straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "They're just horses, Clara. Good ones, yes, but replaceable." His voice softened. "What I've found with you isn't." The simple declaration warmed her through. "Be careful in Sheridan," she said, reaching for his hand. "If Blackwood's men recognize you." "They won't," he assured her. "I'll be just another rancher selling stock." He squeezed her fingers. "I'll be back in 5 days, 7 at the most." That evening, their last before Vincent's departure, they walked together along the lakeshore while Margaret and Lily prepared supper. The setting sun painted the water in golds and pinks, a gentle breeze stirring the surface into tiny ripples. "I've been thinking," Vincent said as they paused at a rocky outcropping, "about after Blackwood, after the debt is settled." Clara's heart quickened. "What about after?" Vincent turned to face her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "I know it's soon. We've known each other barely a month, but I can't imagine going back to the way things were before you ran into my life." "Neither can I," Clara admitted, stepping closer to him. "This valley," Vincent continued, gesturing to the beauty surrounding them. "I always thought of it as my retreat, my hiding place, but these past weeks with you here, it's felt like something else, like home." He took her hands in his. "I want to build a real home here, Clara, a proper house, not just a cabin, a place for a family." Clara's breath caught at the implication. "Are you asking me something?" Vincent Reed, a rare smile spread across his face. "I suppose I am, not very well though." He took a deep breath. Clara Winters, when this is all over, would you consider staying here with me as my wife? Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and effervescent. Yes, she said simply, the single word containing all her heart's certainty. Yes, I would consider that very much. Vincent gathered her close, his kiss filled with promise and future plans. When they finally separated, both breathless, Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What about my mother and Lily?" she asked practically, though she already suspected his answer. "They're welcome here too if they wish," Vincent replied without hesitation. "There's plenty of land. We could build them their own cabin nearby," he chuckled softly. "Though I suspect your mother might prefer the independence of her own property in Bitter Creek once it's secure." Clara nodded, knowing he was right. Margaret Winters was not a woman to be dependent on anyone, even a son-in-law she approved of. "One step at a time," she murmured. "First Sheridan, then Blackwood. Then us," Vincent finished, sealing the promise with another kiss. Vincent departed at dawn, leading the Mustangs with confident hands and a determined set to his shoulders. Clara watched until he disappeared over the ridge, her heart both anxious and hopeful. The days of his absence stretched long, filled with preparations for their eventual journey to Bitter Creek and getting to know her family again after their weeks apart. To Clara's surprise, Margaret and Lily adapted quickly to cabin life. Lily explored the valley with boundless energy, collecting wildflowers and interesting stones, while Margaret proved resourceful in improvising meals from their limited supplies. In the evenings, they shared stories, Margaret recounting town gossip and news, Clara carefully editing her adventures since fleeing Blackwood. On the fifth day, when Vincent had promised to return, Clara found herself unable to concentrate on anything, constantly glancing toward the trail from the North Ridge. When sunset came with no sign of him, she told herself there were countless innocent explanations for the delay: the auction running long, bad weather, a detour to avoid suspicious travelers. By the seventh day, her worry had deepened to genuine fear. Even Margaret's reassurances seemed hollow as they scanned the horizon for any sign of a returning rider. "Something's wrong," Clara said that evening as they prepared for another night without Vincent. "He should have been back by now." Margaret's face was grave as she nodded. "I fear you may be right. We should go look for him," Lily suggested, her young face pinched with concern. She had taken an immediate liking to Vincent, delighted by his knowledge of the forest and wildlife. "We don't know where to look," Clara replied, trying to keep the despair from her voice. "Sheridan's 2 days' ride from here, and he could have taken any number of routes back." "Perhaps," Margaret said thoughtfully, "but there are only so many trails between here and there, and you know this area better than we do now, Clara." Clara considered her mother's words, an idea forming. "You're right, and Vincent taught me how to track. If we took the main trail toward Sheridan, I might be able to find signs of where he went." "It's risky," Margaret cautioned. "Blackwood's men could be anywhere." "So could Vincent," Clara countered, her determination growing. "Possibly injured or in trouble. We can't just wait here indefinitely." After further discussion, they agreed to give Vincent one more day. If he hadn't returned by noon the following day, Clara and Margaret would set out to search for him, while Lily remained safely at the cabin with clear instructions on what to do if they didn't return within 3 days. That night, Clara barely slept, her mind filled with worst-case scenarios. By dawn, she was already up, packing supplies and checking the horses. When mid-morning arrived with still no sign of Vincent, Clara's resolve hardened. They would leave after an early lunch, giving them several hours of daylight to begin their search. As Margaret prepared a simple meal, Clara stepped outside to scan the trail one last time. The valley was peaceful, bathed in golden sunlight, birds calling from the trees. It seemed impossible that anything could be wrong in such a perfect setting. Then she heard a faint jingling like the bells Vincent had strung along the trail. Clara froze, listening intently. Yes, there it was again, followed by the distant sound of hoofbeats. "Mother," she called, hope surging, "someone's coming." They gathered on the porch, watching as a rider appeared on the north trail. Clara's heart sank as she realized it wasn't Vincent. This man was shorter, broader, his horse a piebald gelding she didn't recognize. "Stay inside," Clara told Lily quickly, reaching for the revolver Vincent had left with them. "Mother, go with her." Margaret shook her head. "I'll stay with you," she said firmly, producing a small derringer from her pocket. At Clara's surprised look, she added, "Your father taught me to shoot years ago. I'm quite capable." The rider approached at a steady pace, seemingly unconcerned about the two women waiting on the porch. As he drew closer, Clara recognized him, Jeb Wilson, the trapper who had guided her mother and sister to the valley. "Miss Winters," he called, raising a hand in greeting. "Mrs. Winters, don't shoot an old man bringing news." Clara lowered the revolver slightly. "What news, Mr. Wilson?" Jeb dismounted stiffly, leading his horse to the porch steps. He was an elderly man with a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed little. "About your friend Reed," he said, removing his hat. "He's in trouble." Clara's grip tightened on the gun. "What kind of trouble? Where is he?" "Sheridan Jail," Jeb replied bluntly. "Arrested 3 days ago on charges of horse theft. Those Mustangs he was selling someone claimed they were stolen property." "That's ridiculous," Clara protested. "Vincent raised those horses himself." Jeb nodded. "Likely so. But the accuser is a business partner of Jeremiah Blackwood. Doesn't take much figuring to see what's happened." Margaret stepped forward. "Blackwood found out Vincent was helping us." "Seems that way," Jeb agreed. "Word is the trial's set for next week." "Without proof those horses are rightfully his, Reed's looking at prison time." Cold fear washed over Clara. "We have to help him." "That's why I rode out here," Jeb said. "Thought you should know. Also thought you might have some documentation, bill of sale for the Mustang's dams, breeding records, something to prove Reed came by them honestly." Clara exchanged a look with her mother. "Vincent keeps his important papers at his main cabin," she said. "There might be something there that could help." Margaret's expression was resolute. "Then that's where we need to go." Jeb cleared his throat. "Need to warn you, Blackwood's men have been watching Reed's place. 2 of them camped nearby last I passed." "Of course they are," Clara muttered. The situation was growing more complicated by the minute. "Mr. Wilson, would you be willing to help us? For payment, naturally." The old trapper studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Reed's a good man, helped me out a few winters back when I took sick in the high country. Reckon I owe him." He replaced his hat. No payment necessary. Plans formed quickly. They would leave at dawn, taking a circuitous route to Vincent's cabin to avoid potential watchers. Jeb would create a diversion to draw away Blackwood's men, allowing Clara and Margaret to search for the documents. Once found, they would proceed to Sheridan to present the evidence at Vincent's trial. "It's dangerous," Margaret cautioned as they packed that evening, "if Blackwood realizes we're involved. He'll know I'm still in the territory, not fled to California or Oregon as he might have hoped," Clara finished. "But Vincent risked everything for us. I won't abandon him now." Margaret studied her daughter's determined face. "You love him," she stated simply. Clara nodded, no longer surprised by the depth of her feelings. "I do, and I won't let Blackwood take him from me." The journey to Vincent's cabin was tense but uneventful. Jeb proved to be an excellent guide, leading them along game trails and unused paths that kept them hidden from potential observers. They arrived in the vicinity of the cabin at dusk the following day, setting up a cold camp in a sheltered ravine half a mile away. As darkness fell, Jeb scouted ahead, returning with confirmation of 2 men watching the property, one positioned near the corral, the other in the trees to the west. "Simple enough to draw them off," the trapper said confidently. "Old Jeb still has a few tricks. Be ready to move when you hear my signal." 3 owl hoots, then 2 more after a pause. Clara and Margaret waited anxiously, the minutes stretching endlessly until finally the realistic call of a great horned owl echoed through the trees. Shortly after, they heard shouts and the sound of men crashing through the underbrush, followed by 2 more owl calls. "That's it," Clara whispered. "Let's go." They approached the cabin cautiously, finding it dark and seemingly undisturbed since Vincent's departure. Using the spare key he had shown Clara, they entered quickly, lighting a single lantern with the flame turned low. He said he keeps important papers in a box beneath a loose floorboard, Clara told her mother, moving toward the main room. Under the bed, I think. Together they located the hiding place and extracted a metal strongbox. Inside were land deeds, military discharge papers, and to Clara's relief a small leather folder containing horse breeding records and bills of sale. Among them was documentation for the purchase of a pregnant mare whose description matched the mother of the mustangs Vincent had taken to auction. "This should be enough," Margaret said, examining the papers. "It clearly shows the lineage and his ownership." A sudden noise outside froze them both. Footsteps on the porch, then the sound of the door handle turning. "Quick, the back window," Clara whispered, shoving the documents into her satchel. But before they could move, the door swung open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. "Well, well," said a coldly familiar voice that sent shivers down Clara's spine, "if it isn't my runaway bride." Jeremiah Blackwood stepped into the cabin, followed by two armed men. In his 50s, with iron-gray hair and cold eyes, he carried himself with the arrogance of a man accustomed to power. His expensive clothes and manicured appearance seemed out of place in the rustic cabin. "Jeremiah," Margaret acknowledged stiffly, moving to stand beside her daughter. "Margaret," he returned with a mocking nod. "I'm disappointed. I expected better judgment from you than to aid and abet your daughter's impulsive behavior." "There's nothing impulsive about escaping a forced marriage," Clara retorted, her hand inching toward the revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "A marriage you agreed to, my dear, a binding contract." "A contract made under duress," Margaret countered. "And one that will soon be irrelevant. We're paying off Thomas's debt, Jeremiah, all of it." Something flashed in Blackwood's eyes, surprise, quickly masked by contempt. "With what funds? Your general store barely breaks even." "That's not your concern," Clara said coldly. "The law states that if the debt is paid in full within a year of my father's death, all claims against our property are void. That includes your claim on me." Blackwood's mouth twisted in an ugly smile. "An interesting theory. Unfortunately, your champion won't be in a position to help you fulfill it. Horse theft carries a severe penalty in Wyoming territory." "Vincent didn't steal those horses," Clara said, anger rising. "We have proof." "Proof that will never reach the courthouse," Blackwood replied, gesturing to one of his men. "Jenkins, the satchel?" As the man moved forward, Clara drew her revolver in one smooth motion, just as Vincent had taught her. "Stay back," she ordered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Blackwood seemed more amused than concerned by the weapon. "Come now, Clara, you won't shoot anyone." "You're a shopkeeper's daughter, not a gunslinger." "I'm a woman protecting what matters," Clara corrected, cocking the hammer, "and Vincent taught me well." The confidence in her voice gave Jenkins pause. He looked to Blackwood for direction. "This has gone far enough," Margaret interjected, her own derringer now visible. "Jeremiah, you're facing financial ruin. We all know it. The bank in Cheyenne is calling in your loans, your mining investments have failed, and your last cattle drive barely broke even." Blackwood's face darkened with anger. "Idle gossip. Truth," Margaret countered. "Which is why you're so desperate to secure our land. It borders the water rights you need for your southern pastures. Without it, your ranch loses half its value." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwood's features. "What do you propose?" he asked after a tense moment. "A simple exchange," Clara said, seizing the opportunity. "You drop the charges against Vincent Reed and acknowledge receipt of full payment for my father's debt. In return, we sell you a small easement, just enough for water access, not the entire property." Blackwood considered the offer, clearly calculating his options. "And if I refuse?" "Then we take our evidence to the territorial governor," Margaret replied coolly. "I believe he would be interested to learn how one of the territory's most prominent citizens fabricated criminal charges to prevent the legal settlement of a debt." The standoff stretched for several long moments, the tension in the cabin thick enough to cut. Finally, Blackwood gave a curt nod. "The easement rights alone," he specified, "properly documented by a lawyer, and $200 cash for the debt. And Vincent goes free, all charges dropped." Clara added firmly. Blackwood's jaw tightened, but he nodded again. I'll have papers drawn up. Bring the money to my office tomorrow at noon. No, Clara countered. We meet at the bank in Sheridan with witnesses, and Vincent is released before any money changes hands. A reluctant respect showed in Blackwood's eyes. You've developed quite a backbone, Clara. I always had one, she replied evenly. You just never bothered to notice. The following day found them in Sheridan, entering the imposing brick building that housed both the bank and the office of the circuit judge. Blackwood was already there, accompanied by his lawyer and one of his men. His face was a mask of controlled frustration as Clara and Margaret approached, Jeb Wilson following a few steps behind. Judge Franklin Hathaway, a stern-faced man with bushy white sideburns, presided over the proceedings from behind a massive oak desk. I understand we're here to resolve both a debt settlement and the matter of criminal charges against one Vincent Reed, he stated, peering at them over spectacles. That is correct, Your Honor, Blackwood's lawyer confirmed smoothly. My client has agreed to accept payment for the debt owed by the late Thomas Winters and to withdraw charges against Mr. Reed, contingent upon certain property arrangements. The judge turned to Margaret. Mrs. Winters, are you prepared to settle the debt in full? Margaret nodded, placing a cloth bag on the desk. $200 as agreed, to be counted in the presence of witnesses. As the bank manager verified the sum, Clara's attention was drawn to the door opening behind them. Vincent entered, escorted by a deputy but unshackled. His face was bruised, his clothing rumpled from days in jail, but his eyes found Clara's immediately, relief and love evident in his gaze. Clara longed to go to him but forced herself to remain focused on the proceedings. The judge examined the documents they had recovered from Vincent's cabin, nodding with satisfaction. These breeding records clearly establish Mr. Reed's legitimate ownership of the horses in question, he declared. The charges of theft are dismissed. He fixed Blackwood with a stern look. And I will be noting in my report the questionable circumstances under which these accusations were brought. Blackwood's expression remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. The remaining business proceeded efficiently, the debt was officially recorded as paid in full, and a separate agreement was drawn up granting Blackwood limited water rights across a small corner of the Winters property. By noon, it was finished, the documents signed and notarized. As they exited the bank, Blackwood paused beside Clara. You've made a formidable opponent, Miss Winters, he said quietly. I underestimated you. A common mistake among men who see women as property, Clara replied evenly. Blackwood's mouth tightened. I wish you joy of your Cowboy, he said, with a dismissive glance toward Vincent. Though I imagine frontier life will lose its charm when winter sets in. Clara smiled, unperturbed. Goodbye, Jeremiah. I suggest you focus on rebuilding your finances rather than concerning yourself with my future happiness. With a curt nod, Blackwood departed, his lawyer and henchman trailing behind him. The moment he was gone, Clara rushed to Vincent, who enfolded her in a tight embrace. You're a sight for sore eyes, he murmured against her hair. All of you, he added, including Margaret, Lily, and Jeb in his grateful glance. We weren't about to let you rot in that jail, Clara told him, drawing back to examine his bruised face with concern. Did they hurt you badly? Vincent shook his head. Nothing that won't heal. Though I lost the horses, they were sold at auction before you arrived with the proof. A small price to pay for your freedom, Margaret observed pragmatically, and for putting an end to Blackwood's threats. Vincent nodded, his arm still around Clara's waist. What happens now? He asked, the question directed at all of them but his eyes on Clara. It was Margaret who answered. Now, I believe, we return to Bitter Creek to secure our property and make arrangements for its management, while Lily and I visit my sister in Denver, a visit long overdue. And after that? Vincent asked, his gaze still fixed on Clara. She smiled up at him, her heart full. After that, I believe you mentioned something about building a proper house in a certain valley. Vincent's answering smile was all the confirmation she needed. The autumn of 1876 was unusually mild, with golden days stretching well into October. In the hidden valley that had once been Vincent's solitary retreat, a new home took shape larger than the original cabin, with proper bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and wide windows to capture the magnificent views. Clara and Vincent were married in a simple ceremony in Clearwater, with Margaret, Lily, Jeb Wilson, and a few of Vincent's more trustworthy acquaintances in attendance. They honeymooned in their half-built house, sleeping in the completed bedroom while working together during the days to finish the rest. Margaret and Lily returned from Denver in late November, bringing news that Aunt Catherine would be joining them for Christmas. Rather than staying in the valley, Margaret had decided to renovate the family home in Bitter Creek, hiring a manager for the general store and establishing herself as a businesswoman in her own right. "The town is changing," she told Clara and Vincent over dinner in their new dining room. "Blackwood's influence is waning, the railroad's coming through next year and new people are arriving with fresh ideas." "And Blackwood himself?" Vincent asked, passing a platter of roast venison. "Keeping to his ranch mostly," Margaret replied. "They say he's had to sell off some of his holdings to satisfy the bank. He avoids me when our paths cross in town." Clara smiled at this image. "Wise of him. Between you and Vincent, he's learned some hard lessons about underestimating people." As winter descended on the valley, bringing deep snows and crystalline beauty, Clara found herself more content than she had ever imagined possible. The woman who had once run until her feet bled, desperate and alone, now moved through her days with purpose and joy, surrounded by family and deep love. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire in their completed home, Vincent presented Clara with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, accepting it curiously. "Open it and see," he replied, echoing his words from months ago when he had given her the boots. Inside lay a pair of exquisitely crafted moccasins, made from soft deerskin and adorned with intricate beadwork. "They're beautiful," Clara breathed, lifting one to admire the craftsmanship. "Jeb helped me commission them from a Shoshone woman he trades with," Vincent explained. "I thought, well, your journey began with inadequate shoes. It seemed fitting to mark our new beginning with ones that will serve you better." Clara set the moccasins aside to kiss him deeply, touched by the thoughtfulness behind the gift. "Thank you," she murmured against his lips. "Though I have to tell you, the journey led to exactly where I was meant to be, bleeding feet and all," Vincent smiled, pulling her closer. "No more bleeding feet," he promised. "Just paths we walk together from now on." Outside, snow fell softly on the valley, covering their mountain sanctuary in pristine white. Inside, warmth and love filled every corner of the home they had built together, a refuge no longer of solitude, but of shared dreams and future hopes. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers carpeting the valley and news from Bitter Creek that Jeremiah Blackwood had sold his remaining properties and departed for California, his influence in Wyoming territory finally at an end. The same letter from Margaret brought an invitation for Clara and Vincent to visit in May, when Lily would be celebrating her 13th birthday. As they prepared for the journey, Clara found herself lingering in the doorway of the small room adjacent to their bedroom, a space Vincent had insisted on adding to the house plans without explaining its purpose. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, finding her there one evening, her hand resting thoughtfully on the doorframe. Clara turned to him with a smile that held a secret. "I'm thinking," she said softly, "that we might need to finish this room sooner than we planned." Vincent's brow furrowed in confusion. "Why's that?" Clara took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Because in about 7 months, it will need an occupant." The joy that transformed Vincent's face was something Clara knew she would remember all her days, the way his eyes widened, then softened, the disbelieving smile that spread slowly across his features, the tender reverence with which he cradled her face in his hands before kissing her. "A baby," he whispered against her lips. "Our baby." Clara nodded, her own happiness too great for words. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Vincent's hand protectively covering the place where their child grew, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From desperate flight to profound love, from bleeding feet to a heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such joy. No regrets, Vincent asked softly, seeming to sense the direction of her thoughts. Clara turned in his arms to face him, tracing the beloved contours of his face with gentle fingers. Not one, she assured him. Every step, painful as some were, led me to you, to us, to this life we're building. Outside their window, the moon silvered the peaceful valley that had once been a place of solitude and was now a home filled with love and the promise of new life. Clara Winters Reed, who had once run until her feet bled, had found not just shoes and a place to rest, but a future brighter than she had ever dared to dream.